So welcome, Joost. Thank you for speaking with me today about the entrepreneurship program at MIT. I am so thrilled to have somebody who's been there through many decades of the program. So first off, I wanted to start with how you started off, not just in MIT, but in life. So what was it like growing up in Silicon Valley?
Right.
And how did you?
To be clear, I certainly didn't start entrepreneurship at MIT. That's part of the founding DNA, dating back to the 1860s. But I came, in the mid 1980s for undergrad studies from Silicon Valley. I grew up sort of a few kilometers south of Stanford University and was sort of part of that orbit for growing up. Like so many, my family are immigrants. My father ended up being hired by another immigrant who founded a company in the Stanford Industrial Park. So that's where hundreds of businesses operate in the shadow of Stanford University. And I grew up in that orbit. And most of my friends in elementary school, junior high, high school, they were the sons and daughters of people who were themselves entrepreneurs and overwhelmingly immigrants, like 2/3 from various parts of the world, right? So certainly Asia, but in Asia at that time, a lot from Taiwan, but growing numbers from other quadrants on the planet, right? European, etc. And almost all entrepreneurial, right? So my friends were all thinking these kind of thoughts, new startup thoughts. And that's when, Apple went public, the Apple II happened, the Macintosh happened, right? And I'm growing up, throwing distance from those companies, but decided, no, I didn't want to be anywhere near my parents. And so went across the country to come to MIT for undergrad studies. Mostly because my dad said, don't bother applying, you'll never get in. It's like, oh, he denied it later, but I guarantee he said it because I remember it as if it was yesterday. But what's good about that, and I like I said, he denies it. I think he was, reverse psychology, so smart. But coming out here, I actually didn't really know terribly much about MIT. I had visited with my mother. And that alone was kind of amazing because, I grew up in burbclaves of Silly Valley, which I hated, right? You have to get into a car to go to the corner grocery store. It's just terrible. And I come to Boston and Cambridge, and there's density, and it's a city, and diversity. It's a pretty walkable city. And of course I visited not in the middle of winter, which is, that's the big difference between Silicon Valley and Boston is terrible weather.
That's how they seduce you.
But so look, realizing that I come here, and the next thing you know, in my freshman year, I'm meeting, my roommate is multi-generation MIT alum, and his father was an entrepreneur, and so this stuff we were talking about is startups, what new technology domains are there, what this is the stuff of our conversations for fun. And
you were management major.
No. I was core 6, which is electrical engineering, and I had a sort of biomedical bent. Although I did take business school classes, in particular the system dynamics stuff, which is kind of like nonlinear differential equations for business. And by the way, founded by Jay Forrester, who I think as a business school professor has had more students found industries or Fortune 500 companies than anybody else, right? So, Ken Olson, who founded Digital Equipment, was one of his students. Bob Metcalf, who founded 3Com, was one of his students. What's his name? Patney, who founded Patney Computer Systems, which spun out Infosys, right? The first of the was one of Forrester's students, right? And then a whole pile of consulting related ventures, Pew Roberts, the list goes on. Yeah, wow. Interesting stuff. So the key is I come here as an undergrad and immediately get immersed in this sort of engineering meets entrepreneurship world. And I was lucky. My freshman or sophomore year, a guy named Peter Mui, who was one of Doc Edgerton's assistants. Yeah, Peter had come as an undergrad, worked with Doc, and Doc Edgerton, right? Super supportive, connection making, entrepreneurial faculty member. The E in EG&G, Edgerton, Germishausen, and Greer, which is a huge like defense contractor in the 1960s and 70s. So Peter had started the MIT Entrepreneurs Club, which is an undergrad-oriented club. And he'd early on roped in Doug Ling, Richard Scheideroff, and I showed up at the first or second meeting. I can't really remember, it's a bit fuzzy, but it was supportive. It was like, look, it's a place for people who want to do this stuff. And within a year, Richard and Doug had started the then 10K entrepreneurship competition because they wanted to promote the club, right? So the competition was started as a promotional vehicle.
Wow.
And then they said, well, we're mostly engineers. Why don't we rope in the business school? MIT Sloan School of Management had at the time something called a New Ventures Association, NVA. So he said, well, why don't we do a joint venture between Sloan New Venture Association and the E Club, the MIT Entrepreneurs Club, which is engineering oriented, and run the competition. And oh, by the way, why don't we get the deans of the two schools to sign a letter? Now, I don't have a copy of that letter, but I'm pretty sure it happened, where they both endorsed it. They said, you know, we've got a long track record, and the deans are like, we encourage you to participate. It was this generic letter. And, you know, it cost them nothing, but it was part of what helped raise a little money for prizes. You know, MIT is really pretty, gives a lot of free rein to students to do, you know, nonprofit clubs. And nobody was going to make any money doing this. This was purely a club activity, kind of like a sports club or a music club or a theater club. Only now it was a startups club, right?
Wow.
Encouraging people to do startups. So MIT was very, very free in enabling that. Now there's much more constraints now because of bigger budgets, and so there's more oversight. That's a story for later. But in the beginning, certainly this was treated the same as you know, doing an entrepreneurs club was treated the same as starting a you know, a musical arts club or
the car club. We were all just raising money for ourselves as undergrads, and a big part of running the company was learning how to network and call sponsors and raise money for the.
So this is you know, the genius of this is of the MIT approach at the time anyways was because students were given a tremendous amount of freedom, they also had to do all the work of stuff. So for example, until only in the early 2000s, when there were some scandals, for 100 years, students had run their own living groups, right? So the fraternities and increasingly sororities and the independent living groups. It turns out doing that is like running a business. So the schooling that the average engineer at MIT got in business was not going to the business school. It was running their own independent living group.
That's true.
And running it meant you had to get everybody to pay dues, so pay rent and pay fees for things like meals, hire a cook, get food delivered on a regular basis so you can actually have meals, deal with the maintenance, repair, overhaul of your buildings, deal with all the government craziness that you have to deal with. Like it's running a business. And then, by the way, they all have to recruit at the beginning of the school year to get a new crop of students to live there. And if you fail at recruiting, it means everybody else pays more bills, and you have a lousy, you know, freshman class of new people. Well, that's amazing. That's like running a business. So a huge fraction of the entrepreneurial learning that generations of MIT undergrads had was by running their
living groups.
And the same is true with like managing like a sports team, right? It's all organizational stuff that you never get in your engineering classes, and yet it really matters.
That's brilliant.
So let me see the key. So when I landed here as an undergrad, the only entrepreneurship infrastructure was threefold. One, class at Sloan called New Enterprises, which had been started by Dick Morris back in the 60s. At the time, it was taught by, I think, Eric von Hippel or Russ Olive, Caesar Sloan faculty and adjunct faculty members. there was one class. There was this entrepreneurs club, which was this undergrad oriented thing housed in the Edgerton Center. And the Edgerton Center was, this sort of space that Doc Edgerton carved out for doing lots of stuff with students, mostly technical. Right. So Peter Mui within Edgerton's orbit helped start. So Peter's an important person in all this because he said it's not just invention, it's also venturing, which follows invention. And then the third is there was an alumni-oriented MIT Enterprise Forum, which had multiple chapters in different parts of the country and, then around the world, but that came later. But the Alumni Enterprise Forum was an important part of the mix because at the time they were running some pretty substantial big events because those were it, right? And the alums, right? There's only 10,000 or so students at MIT if you include all the more grad students and then 4,000 undergrads. But there's today 120,000, 150,000 alumni.
Wow.
And so the alumni are the ones who are actually doing the startups. Now, is it all of them? No, I think it's maybe 2, 3, 5% who are actually entrepreneurs. And if you disentangle independent business people, right? So an architect, independent architect, or an independent consultant, or an independent, designer, that's the majority of the entrepreneurs. The ones who start these growth scalable businesses, right? The MIT alums who founded Texas Instruments or Intel or Genentech, right? Those are all growth ventures that grow well beyond being in a single person consultancy or a small consultancy. Those are really rare. There's maybe hundreds of companies that have grown to beyond, say, $100 million in revenue.
Wow.
Actually, I don't really remember at this point, I don't know the numbers. It might be 1,000, but it's not thousands. It's much smaller numbers. And a lot of times they don't do it on their first try, right? So even Bob Noyes with Intel, right? That's not his first company. Or earlier companies included Fairchild, and he had joined another alum, Shockley, at the very first sort of semiconductor startup in Silicon Valley, right? So that's another important part of the story here is repeat shots on goal, like trying it again and again.
And you as an undergrad were just going to these meetings and just talking to your friends, and then they were 10K.
Let's see, the Entrepreneurs Club for decades has had sort of Tuesday night meetings. They just sort of pick the night. The location has shifted in various places, but Tuesday night was sort of a constant. And that's an off night, right? So it's not like a Thursday or Friday, so that's smart. Tuesday is kind of clever enough. So there's some conflicts with Tuesday night classes, but it's pretty good. And then they were smart. They said, so Richard, I think it was Shaderoff, he said, let's do a seminar immediately after the club meeting. So you can have the sort of informal part, and then you have a credit bearing part. So that was one of the first new additions to the mix. Now I had entered the first year of this 10K, now 100K entrepreneurship competition with a whole bunch of ideas. Like a classic engineer, I was like, I got many ideas. Let me just put them all on paper and submit them and let them tell me which one they want to hear more about. And I'll go to town on whatever one they think is most interesting. So I had 8 ideas, all of which were, pretty cool. Most of which have now happened. It was everything from flying car to a bird feeder to motorcycle with a roll cage to it's just and a bunch of IT ideas, wearable computers, right? So Google Glass, Windows within Windows, we call that VMware now.
Amazing,
right? So ideas, but all in sort of technocratic form. Here's the idea. Here's why it would be cool. Nothing about business, nothing about team, right? So guess what happened? All 8 flushed, didn't even make it to the second round. So I like, well, this sucks. And the team that won was some PhD student who was doing laser ablation of silicon wafers to clean them. And we're like, how the hell am I ever going to win this, right? It's not for undergrads. You have to be sort of,
on your research path. Yeah.
Of course, that was actually kind of depressing. I'm like, I don't care about this. I didn't go to the finals, and they gave me an award for most prolific entry. But I didn't pick it. I got it only later. It was really nice. It was a light bulb,
That's awesome.
with most prolific and then light bulb. So it was really beautiful. But I'm like, I didn't win this thing. I'm never going to win anything. So it was kind of demoralizing. And I think that was where I realized that you have to be more subtle. In my opinion, the thing is you have to be critical. So the critique, which was legitimate, it's like, wait, this isn't a business plan. This is a tech proposal.
Right.
Where's the team? There's you, the engineer, but who else? Where's some sense of the market size? Like how many people might need this and how much would they pay for it? I had none of that. I just said, look, people will want flying cars. Like how am I supposed to guess how big the market is going to be? It's going to be huge. It's going to be like the car industry.
Right.
But when? Like, well, 30 years later, flying cars are sort of happening, but there's no commercial flying car company at scale, right? That's selling Tesla scale units now.
Right.
So I was premature. So the critique would be, well, look, these ideas are compelling, but maybe there's still a little science fiction. There's more. There's easier things to be done earlier. And so my own personal attitude about other people's ideas was informed by that early loss and the harshness of not progressing at all in this competition.
Wow. So that's when you realized that it would be good for undergrads to meet some of the MBAs who can understand how to pitch these things better.
In part, I'm not sure I put it in terms of meeting the MBAs. I put it in terms of
Network.
people who would have insight in those matters. And really more, I was thinking alumni at that point.
Oh yeah.
Because alums who had graduated just a few years earlier would be in a position to give like a reality check on things. And in part, this was informed by, look, the Alumni Association at MIT, does undergrads a lot of favors. And among the favors they do is say, okay, imagine the career you're going for. And at the time I was thinking pre-med, so doctor, so medical devices would be my training, and then medical device venture would be the startup. So I said MD, and I got teamed up with a doctor, took me around on his rounds, right? That was that's an amazing benefit. Right. And it was partially inspirational for, wow, a person like this, grad from a couple decades earlier, could be an advisor. And so generalizing that was really an important part of the mix. So there were actually multiple of these now, but the Alumni Association was doing sort of a generic meet people from industry. We meet alums who were in various industries, right? If you're going to be, if you're thinking lawyer, then hang out for a day with an MIT alum who's a lawyer.
Yeah,
it wasn't about startups; it was about careers.
Right.
At least when I experienced it. Now, of course, what ended up happening is the Alumni Association. So fast forward to today, we're talking a couple decades. All sorts of different parts of MIT have entrepreneurial support things. The Industrial Liaison Program, which used to deal with only huge companies, now has something called STEX, which is support for startup companies. Rebecca Zhang runs this. They're like alumna from the Media Lab, out of the social media group, who started her own company, Hey Let's Go, which became Going, which sold to AOL. So she then, fast forward, comes back to MIT to run this thing. And that's just one example. That's the Industrial Liaison Program, which is the oldest academic to industry connection, I think, in the country, right? President McLaurin started it in 19 teens, and then Jim Killian sort of rebooted it just after World War II, right? So it's 70 years old, and it's no longer focused on big companies. There's a small startups dimension to it. The licensing office, which was rebooted in the mid-1980s, is a steady source of a couple dozen startups every year. Now there's the Entrepreneurship Center, which I helped name in its second incarnation. It's now the Trust Center for Entrepreneurship, based at the Sloan School. that didn't exist in the beginning. I told you there were three things when I was here as an undergrad: the alumni stuff, the one class, and the student club,
Right.
which became clubs, which became competition. So the entrepreneurship competition, 10K, then 50K, then 100K, that was the dominant thing that students experienced from, or could experience from, roughly 1990 through probably like the MIT Entrepreneurship Center at Sloan really became an organized thing in the late 1990s, right? So there's a whole, and even then it was small fry. It was two offices, not much. So only in the 2010s did it really become something. But all along, right, student clubs were doing far more stuff, starting up what became classes, like the Venture Capital Private Equity Club, together with the Innovation Club, started what became iTeams. iTeams is now a class, but it didn't start that way. It started as a joint venture around innovation teams run by students. To get it formalized, to get some credit for doing it, the students roped in a faculty member, Ken Zola. And Zola turned it into seminar and then a more formal offer.
Wow.
Right? And that's how a whole pile of things got going. But it wasn't always that way. Sometimes faculty were highly motivated. So for example, let's see, a PhD student, Satbir Kanuja, and alum who is now a technology licensing officer, Alex Latz, they roped Drazen Pralik, a Sloan marketing professor, and me into creating a seminar offering called MIT Technologies with New Venture Potential. So you had a marketing professor running a class to assess the market need for technologies coming out of MIT. Now, Drazen taught it for, I want to say, a year, maybe two. Then he handed it off to a visiting marketing professor. Then when that professor left, it died. Right? That's late 1990s, like 97, 98, that time frame.
Wow.
Because nobody was paying attention. Then a year later, 2000, 2001, Joe Jacobs, Media Lab professor, had spun out a company, E-Ink. On his board was Dave Yoff, Harvard Business School professor. So Media Lab professor and Harvard Business School professor start talking, so we should do a class together. Right? Breaking all the rules, two universities that are rivals, not working with MIT Business School, working with the Harvard Business School. Joe asked me, hey, would I help run this class? Would I be, sort of super TA, if you will, because I was still a student. Absolutely. And it's MIT students and Harvard students, right? The Harvard, HBS admits the Harvard, MIT admits the MIT students. Yep.
It happened.
Well, that was amazing, because what ended up happening is HBS promoted it as, an exclusive offering, 50 HBS MBAs with 50, Media Lab PhD students.
Wow.
Which is complete BS. There aren't 50 Media Lab PhD students, and certainly not all of them are going to want to take our class in one semester. So it was BS promo on the Harvard side, but it didn't matter, because the Sloan students caught wind of it and went nonlinear. They wrote emails to the dean saying, WTF, what's going on here, right? The Media Lab is going upriver for business engagement. Why can't we do this and get ourselves our act together? So that led to emergency town hall meetings at the Sloan School, and they had to answer questions like, wait, you had a class called MIT Technologies with New Venture Potential and you let it die? Yeah. The deputy dean didn't have a good answer, because there wasn't one. They were fools, to be blunt. And so we taught our class and admitted a much broader MIT side, including Sloan School students. Harvard was more narrowly HBS, but it didn't matter, because here's the secret. It turns out the entrepreneurship program at Harvard Business School is like half MIT undergrads who went on to HBS, right? So that's who actually for years had run entrepreneurship at Harvard. There's a long history of MIT engineers and Harvard Business School, sort of teaming up, right? It's almost like a canonical combination. And Harvard Business School is much older than Sloan. Sloan's only, 1952, and for years was maybe 200 students. It only became 400 students per class in the mid to late 1990s, right? So relatively recent. Whereas Harvard's been 900 students for decades. So much bigger
And
and older
established.
and wealthier and, all sorts of things.
They know how to promote themselves really well too.
So and guess what? That class was also pretty epic, right? Because we ended up having Harvard pay for the bus between MIT and HBS. So logistics turnkey. There was everybody was highly motivated. So all sorts of interesting things came out of that. That first was called technology and competitive strategy, and then the year after we called it technology and entrepreneurial strategy. But then the powers that be came in, forced us to have so in the first year, they gave us an emergency MIT Sloan School number, 15 point something or another. In the second year, they said, well, shotgun wedding, you need a Sloan faculty member. And that was a waste of, I don't want to go into that, but that basically killed it because that was useless. Compared to the original, the founding year, where it was this sort of exotic affair, Harvard and MIT somehow collaborating. Now, of course, it's a long history of Harvard and MIT collaborating, health science and technology, et cetera, et cetera. But this was like a stealth from below version, without question, because, we basically, so Joe on the Media Lab side, he was teaching a Media Lab class. From the Media Lab's, from MIT's point of view, it was just an MIT class. HBS, from HBS's point of view, was teaching this. And they just timed it so the two were together. And that's how you do a quick and dirty, let's just try it and stop arguing. Because, you could spend forever trying to do a formal agreement and get approvals from everybody. You just do it. Now, this wasn't me saying, this was a tenured professor saying,
And they had the promotion value of HBS behind them.
Yeah. Plus, there's a good story there. Like, oh, we founded a company that became the basis for the Amazon Kindle and a bunch of others. Like, yeah, that's where the relationship. So it wasn't just a hypothetical; it was a real relationship, right? E-Ink's founding team was two MIT undergrad alums who were, I want to say chemists, or at least sort of science and engineering-esque, who'd done Europs in the Micromedia group, Joe's then group. And the business school side, I want to say it's, the hell's his name? He's now Russ Wilcox, by HBS alum, whose advisor was Dave Yaffe, right? So that's where the tie came. Wow. So it was a classic, and there's a whole, Media Lab is like this, right? The very first Media Lab company was Diva, digital video editing for consumer, a joint venture between Hans-Peter Bronma, who was one of Gloriana Davenport's students at the Media Lab, master students, and Jonathan Harber, who was what we now call MBA student at Sloan School, right? So it was this joint, hacker meets hustler. And things like Agents Inc. was a similar thing, only it was the Media Lab people were teamed up with HBS people. Right? And that combo, whether it was Sloan students or Harvard Business School students, the engineers didn't care. They wanted a relationship.
Right.
And so whoever they had the best connection with. And so the events and organizations that I ended up helping get going had a lot to do with maximizing the odds of potentially connecting with somebody. Because you needed to meet a lot of people to have a few where like, hey, I really like how this person thinks. They seem trustworthy. I need to spend more time to really get to know them. But you needed, as an engineer, to meet with a lot of business types in order to get some sense of who of all of them you like the best.
That's
like,
true.
Who did you have some, resonate with?
Yeah.
And so when I was running the entrepreneurship competition, and when my successors were running it, I emphasized how do people make connections, and helped the current lead organizer. So I had been a lead organizer, and then I was sort of a volunteer helper as an alumnus with a bunch of my successors. And that's where a bunch of the events came from. So for example, Mike Pardue, Sloan MBA, took on running the entrepreneurship competition in, I want to say in 99, 2000, somewhere in that time frame, maybe 2001. He had the idea of instead of having schmooze gatherings in Walker Memorial, or in some big open space. Let's go to the labs. So he went to the AI lab, he went to Aeroastro, he went to biology department, and he usually got some famous faculty in entrepreneur to introduce things. 5 minutes, no more, right? So it wasn't a talk, but they were a keynote headliner.
Nice.
So it was Phil Sharp in the biology department, right? Nobel Prize winning founder of Biogen, who kicked things off. Says, listen, you're all here because you care about the future of the biotechnology industry. I had my own experience starting Biogen, and I encourage you all to think, what's next, right? And then so schmooze, and there's the food, buffet style. Please do mix with one another, right? And that's all he had to say.
Wow.
But an excuse to get off. I mean, who's not going to show up if you have Phil Sharp as the sort of kickoff?
Yeah.
It hangs out for a little while, but he's got stuff to do. But that was enough. And if I can't remember who it was in I want to say it was Rod Brooks in AI, although it might have been, I can't remember. It was a while ago. Right. But the key point is it wasn't about the professor talking, it was about the students meeting.
Connections. Yes, making connections and de-risking it for the students. Like the social aspect, I think has been missed a lot of the times. Just having the right venue for people to mix and meet each other from across the institute. It's been really amazing to see how that's grown, because I feel without that piece, we wouldn't have this ecosystem. Like that's just an essential component. And I don't think anybody else except maybe you and maybe a few others saw that that was an important part. And having been a beneficiary of it, I feel like, wow, how amazing it is to have that insight early on that you needed to make people meet each other in order to let them grow into these amazing connections.
Just to be fair, right? I wasn't the only one. So like I said, I was helping Mike Pardue, whose idea it was to do these events in vivo, in situ. So there were others along the way, lead organizers of the competition, the events team lead, and a lot of those people along the way, getting the 100K finals event to happen at Bob Metcalf's house was another one of the student ideas. It helped, but I didn't push for it. I helped start 2 other salons with Metcalf, but which were role models. The idea of having a finalist one was their push. So it wasn't just me. And today it's a very different beast. The Deshpande Center has biannual schmooze gatherings. The Venture Mentoring Service does the same. The STEX, the Industrial Liaison, does the same. The Trust Center for Entrepreneurship at MIT does the same. The Legatum Center for Development and Entrepreneurship. Each one of these things has today these schmooze gatherings.
Right.
So it, in that sense, became formalized. And I don't dare take credit for all that, except to say I don't need to do it anymore, because these events are doing what I used to do. And we also, this was a pre-bureaucratic time. I mean, a lot of bloatocracy happened in the last decades. I mean, the last 2 years has been nuts, right? You can't do anything.
Wow.
So for example, for decades, the MIT pub was far friendlier to having non-MIT people participating in events. And it wasn't as popular. It was the pub was empty on Monday nights, Tuesday nights, Wednesday nights, empty. There was a few people sitting in the bar, and maybe there was a peak period at 5 p.m. But it wasn't nearly as popular as it became. So there was nights available for doing informal gatherings.
Yeah, I love those meetups.
That was, and it was a period of time when it was fun to do. The bar management was pretty friendly. They had a relaxed interpretation of the rules, not about drinking age, but about whether you had an MIT ID or you walked in with an MIT person. I mean, it was just, now they're very different.
Wow.
So it was a friendly place to do stuff.
Right. Made the difference.
Years. And then we were able to do similar things in other venues. I started doing even bigger gatherings at the MIT Museum, did a couple events, faculty club even, did a bunch of events at the Media Lab, which, the Media Lab in MIT context is like Switzerland, right? It's in the middle of the campus. The academic side, MIT is like a two wings on a plane, split by Mass Ave. The West Wing is where students live and they play sports. The East Wing is where all the labs are and all the classrooms. In the East Wing, Media Lab is neutral zone between engineering on the one hand and science and business, right? And much of humanities, which is pretty small. And itself is part of the School of Architecture and Planning, oldest school in the nation, but it's not science nor engineering nor business. It's neutral. And that matters because we're always like, we're a tiny school, right? There's only in recent years 20, but as many as 40 master's students in the Media Lab per year.
Yeah.
There's 400 MBA students per year, right? The Media Lab is tiny, but has disproportionate influence and visibility, which is good. So as a venue for hosting things was wonderful. We did just a whole pile of events for that purpose. I was attracted. One of our students, Mike Kosofsky, started Innovation Club. And we started having events around that, right? Gadget gathering, which is bring your favorite gadgets. And invariably the discussion goes, well, what's next? And you start talking entrepreneurial thoughts, right? You didn't have to have an event about entrepreneurship in order to have entrepreneurially minded people show up.
Right.
And that's why I helped start, Innovation Club, helped Dave Danielson start MIT Energy Club, helped Nora Brown start MIT Energy Conference. Danielson and I started MIT Energy Night, which is not about startups, it's about energy innovations, some of which are startups.
Wow.
And ditto with colleagues in D-Lab and at Technology and Culture Forum, started the International Development Nights at the museum, which again is not only about startups, is also about inventions, but it's blurring both. Yeah, whole pile of things of that flavor. Technology dinner talks.
Wow.
Where half the time it was startup entrepreneur, but it was about the technology side of things. But Lily Kim started something called what do we call it? Fluidic MEMS.
Oh yeah,
Which is about microfluidic tiny technologies for the biosciences. And half the time the speakers were entrepreneurs commercializing something out of a lab. The other half of the time it's like the CTO of a bigger company or a more established company.
Wow.
But if you listen to all of these invention-oriented talks, was entrepreneurial vibe. And that's an important part of the mix.
Yeah, it also seems like having some flexibility about how all these different groups are trying to find the right venue, the right mix of people. Like it seems like, it's morphed over the years, but that's representative of the different needs of the environment that you're in. Like sometimes it was media, sometimes it was biotech, sometimes it was science, right. Pure sciences.
My attitude was to have these sort of the big O's. There's an MIT matrix, which is on the one hand you've got the big O's, right? Bio, nano, bio, info. Like the big O's were what engineering dean Tom Magnani called the big disciplines. But there's sort of quanto, crypto, neuro, socio, eco, astro, right? Those are all the disciplines on one axis. And then you have the application domain, markets on another axis, like health, energy, cities, finance, learning, governance. These are the uses of those technologies. So the MIT matrix is technology plus use. And where those two intersect is market opportunity.
Yeah.
And so from my point of view, we were just sort of tiling that landscape. It's like, well,
Uh,
and sometimes, I had about a bunch of mistakes. We with Jose Pacheco and let's see, Aaron, Jim, a whole pile of people, we started something called the Tiny Tech Club, Tiny Technologies. So nano and micro nano, which was Technology Push Club. And it turns out that was confusing because you had all these bio-oriented people doing health and all these people doing energy, like photovoltaics types. And 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 what we later realized is that tech push clubs don't work nearly as well as market pull clubs. Energy Club was about all the different technologies that could be game changing in the energy usage arena, the energy marketplace. The Health Tech Club or Health Club would absorb whatever. It could be biology, it could be organ level, could be
was
imaging technologies. So they were market pull clubs versus tech push clubs, where entrepreneurship kind of cuts across those, but in some ways it's too generic. Because it's, what kind of an event goes well when you have only biotech entrepreneurs talking with only, I don't know, materials entrepreneurs. There are actually really interesting overlaps, but most of them just sort of talk different languages. Now the overlaps are really, really interesting, right? So we actually a whole series on that too. Robo meets health.
social.
Robo meets architecture, right?
Yeah.
So you have an enabling technology and some big sector, and then you attract people who care about that combination. At the Media Lab, like some of the most interesting clubs were interest groups. There was the desktop, the sort of DIY desktop printing effort. The wearables initiative was not one professor led; it was bunch of students pushing things from below. The international development stuff within the Media Lab. This was, Ian McGuire, Saul Griffith, Nitin Sawhney, the Think Cycle crew, teaching a seminar, talking Mitch Resnick into being an advisor for the seminar.
Wow.
It continues. One of the postdocs started a textiles, so technology and fashion. And she was building on the shoulders of people like Maggie Orth, who had done her thesis on electrochromic textiles and started international fashion machines before this was obvious. And Amanda Parks, who had started the Media Lab working with Maggie, and Amanda later went and founded a biotech company and is now heavily involved in the commercial arena around technology and fashion, right? Yeah, it's interesting. And people who didn't necessarily think of themselves as entrepreneurs ended up becoming entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Which is also, that's I think a very good thing, but it's not for everybody, right? There's plenty of people for whom, they're more, they have obligations, like on the family side or health wise, who knows? Everybody has their own set of burdens. So starting up a company is that's a full-time job, and then having these additional burdens can be like too many full-time jobs all at once. So it's not for everybody to start up a company, and a lot of people don't have that mindset, or they're too distracted, like too many ideas. Like that's not good. You need an idea, and when that's successful, you can have other ideas. But the vast majority of people are not Elon Musk with 2 or 3 simultaneous CEO positions, right? And even he didn't start that way. He started with something much simpler back in the PayPal days. So, yeah.
But it's great. It's great to open up this world to people who might not necessarily think of it. And then also just help make those connections to make taking that leap easier.
Yeah.
And I think
some of the best entrepreneurs don't go through formal business training, right? So that's another myth. I mean, I think it is true today, but it wasn't always the case, that there's a heavy, like disproportionate percentage of entrepreneurs at MIT's business school, Sloan School of Management. But Sloan School is still only 10-12% of all of MIT, right? There's way more students than the rest.
Yeah.
And if you look historically, it's a pretty rare thing for a business school alum to be the founder of one of the giant companies, right? Alex Darbeloff from Teradyne, Bob Swanson from Genentech. Those are the exceptions, not the rule. Like
Right.
the normal mode was, or somebody like Bob Metcalf was, a weird case because he was a dual, he was business and engineering.
Yeah. And there are
The
undergrads who already come in having already had entrepreneurial experience, which is interesting as well.
It's epic. I mean, nowadays it's certainly doable. I had baby version of that. I'd run my own like neighborhood yard company, and I had like Warren Buffett, right? Buffett talks about his first business experience as being a newspaper delivery boy. Ditto. I had to deliver newspapers, which was a good way to figure out that that's not the career to be in. But you had to get up on time. You had to do your job within the time constraint. You had to not miss. You had to keep tabs on all sorts of stuff. And if you were smart, you go visit them and get a tip.
Yeah.
It did come automatically. You had to go do all this stuff. Right? It's business.
Wow.
And same with mowing lawns and taking care of yards.
That's amazing.
You learn a lot in high school and in junior high. And kid care, right? So being a babysitter for the neighborhood kids, like all of those things, those are lessons, aspects of business.
Right.
More
Right.
of
That's
those kids,
cool.
the better. I was
Yeah.
also part of Junior Achievement, which at the time had 24 high school students simulate running a business. By actually, at the time, they were actually building stuff. So we did, a computer peripheral and a genius product, gas meter cutoff wrench, which is basically a piece of metal with a hole punched out of it with a label on it. In case of earthquake, you'd turn off the gas. $5, price, 25 cents cost of goods. It was a genius business. I sold one to every third household in my neighborhood.
Wow.
I'd go up, start talking, and 1/3 of people would put $5 on the table just to get me to shut up. That was a great lesson in planning and in margin, right? To learn that's how you fat margin is how you pay the bills for all sorts of other stuff.
Yeah. Wow.
Now, the more today, those are joke experiences compared to what a freshman can come into school having done already. They can have done a software business. They can have done. I mean, one of my buddies, Tracy Cullinan, had started a software business as a junior high student, right? But the rest of us were slackers compared to Tracy.
Right.
I think today, it's almost you have to have started some kind of business before coming to undergrad for many students, or had done something, right? Invented something,
right?
Led something. And all of those are manifestations of creativity, right? In other words, MIT has 5 schools, and we're like, oh, business and entrepreneurship is about the Sloan School. Like, well, no, they're all actually variations. Engineers invent, scientists discover, the architects and artists, an author, paint, whatever. And who else is left? I mean, humanities, arts, and social sciences, and architecture and planning are sort of classic creative skills.
Right.
They actually have more in common than apart. They just manifest themselves slightly differently, right? The scientist discovering stuff doesn't have the same application orientation as an engineer inventing stuff.
Right.
But it's creativity, as entrepreneurial thinking is applied creativity.
That's how brilliant having a club is, because it welcomes people from all walks.
I think the important thing to realize is MIT has benefited from having great constancy in a few people who helped keep a core ethos going over a long period of time. Because what otherwise happens, like, for example, Sloan School no longer has a new venture association. And it's had 5 incarnations of an entrepreneurs club. Now there's 2 completing entrepreneurs clubs. And what happens is the students who start them within a year or 2 graduate.
Yeah, they leave.
And over half the time, they screw up the transition from one year to the next. So there's no successors. They have to reinvent everything. So usually they just start a new club because it's easier than trying to figure out what the hell happened. So it's actually the rare club that successfully transfers from year to year. Either an alumni advisory board or faculty who are good at being the continuity. But a lot of times faculty don't want to be bothered, and alums aren't asked, or they don't know how to play. There's a difference between, and I had to learn this kind of the hard way, as an alum advising my successors, it had to be advice. I couldn't tell them what to do, even though I knew what ought to be done, in my opinion. But if I tried to bully them into doing it, well, that's a no-win situation, because then it's no longer theirs.
Right.
And having this difference, realizing what it means to be it's a governance advisory situation, not I'm not running it. I'm advising you what I would do if I were you.
Wow, that's amazing insight.
And having some sophistication at that came unnaturally to me. I knew how to do things myself, and I knew how to divide and conquer, sort of saying, okay, here's what needs happening. You do this, you do that. Like, to tell people what to do. But attracting people to doing something, I was not so good at. Had to learn that the hard way. One of the MBAs took me aside and said, here, Joost, this is why your leadership isn't working. And I go, in fact, very helpful to hear that. Andre Morkel, South African, Australian. It's very helpful to hear a blunt. And it was something I said to you earlier, which is compassionate criticism. I mean, it was critique. In other words, look, here's what's not working, and here's what you might consider doing, but also compassionate in the sense of, or empathetic criticism, where look, I think you're well-meaning, you're just making these mistakes, and I'm not sure you see them as mistakes, but here's what we see as outsiders viewing what you're up to.
Wow.
And being like that, or having people who are like that in your life, really matters. Like, almost having a personal advisory board is a good idea for everybody. And you need people who are constructive in their criticism,
right,
compassionate, empathetic, while critiquing, right? And not this kumbaya, oh, you're doing wonderful. It's like, no, baloney. Here's a bunch of things that you could be doing better. Except I'm not bullying you about it, and I'm not telling you what to do. I'm
sharing,
doing it in such a way that is ultimately constructive, right? Because we do have the same overarching goal, which is you succeeding, right? The person you're engaging with succeeding.
right.
And not everybody's good at that. I think some of the best, to put this by analogy, not every faculty member in a research lab is an equally good advisor. Some have these properties more than others, right? And those who are best regarded are ones who are no slouch in technically, but they know how to convey their criticism and their advice in such a way that it's best absorbed.
Yes, they can communicate with grace and wisdom.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's fantastic, because that covers, I think, almost everything that I think is important for people who want to start up their own entrepreneurship program. Like, the most essential parts that have not been covered in all the other things that have been written about, the structures and the lineage of different entrepreneurship classes within MIT and initiatives. Thank you.
Ooh, let me just put one other thing out there. The way academia gets things done is threefold. You do research with faculty and labs. You take classes, often with faculty, but also peer students in a classroom or Zoom. And you do extracurriculars beyond lab or class,
Yes.
right?
That's from your thesis.
And and here's the genius of a place that like this, the lines are blurred. Something that starts as an academic exercise, like a class project, may get upgraded to become a research project. And it usually has an extracurricular step along the way too.
Yeah.
So here at MIT, Joy Bulamwini was a master's student in our Sci-Fab class. She does a cool project to make a magic mirror that overlays on her face some avatar. Right? She can't get the code to recognize her dark skin, and she's pretty frustrated about this because the code is biased. It was trained on a Scandinavian data set with no faces like hers.
Oh, wow.
So she ends up pushing this much further, starts the Algorithmic Justice League as this almost sidecar thing, extracurricular, and then realizes, this is such a big deal. I'm going to pursue it for my PhD. She does, and a month ago defends
Wow.
on algorithmic bias. Now, this is something which started as a class project. Well, I mean, she'd been thinking, she came to this with lots of background. So it wasn't just the class, but the class was like an element in her mix. And she ends up using all three of those vehicles to get things done.
Nice.
Including being entrepreneurial with .org, right? Algorithmic Justice League is a sort of is a nonprofit spinoff, which is perfectly legitimate. We don't talk enough about that. Like
Right.
not everything for profit, right? There's nonprofits as well as for profits.
Definitely.
And sometimes this is starting entire schools. So there's a Berklee College of Music. Guess what? That's Lawrence Burke, MIT architecture grad, creating a school for jazz music because there wasn't one. He names it after his son, Lee Burke. That's why it's called Berklee College
Wow.
of Music.
Oh my
And
God.
another MIT alum, Roger Babson, before there was the MIT Sloan School of Management, Babson donates his Wellesley estate to the creation of a business school, right? Babson College.
Amazing.
And the list goes on.
Yeah.
Like starting a school is a perfectly legitimate thing to do, but it's usually a nonprofit.
Yeah.
Salman Khan from Khan Academy, right? That's Cloud
Videos
University,
for his
Cloud Academy.
nephew. Yeah.
Another good example. And that list goes on. So
The harmonic.
realize it doesn't matter, sometimes research lab stuff becomes a spinoff, which is an extracurricular activity. And along the way, think of you. Here you are, Tinker Books is your PhD studies.
Mhm.
Along the way, you take our media ventures class and say, could we do more with this or could I do something else?
Yeah.
And it turns into the Tinker Stories as a blog plus a venture.
Yeah.
And there's lots of examples that are akin to that, where people will go from one to the other. They use the various vehicles of academia to get something accomplished. And
Yeah.
the most organized students have a whole, they view the three ways: research, education, extracurriculars, and they have their handful of MIT projects, right? 3 to 5. It's a matrix. And if you're organized, you're systematically every week, every day thinking, am I doing something to advance my goals using the vehicles of the university?
That's amazing. They should teach this in freshman seminar.
Excellent point. They should.
They should. This is an amazing story, and I wish that I had been savvy to it when I was an undergrad, because there are things that I did as undergrad that I would think, it's too late now because those things have already come. But the Solar Car Club, there was we did carbon fiber layup of the fairing. I learned how to do that, and I was thinking, people could make their own custom bike frames and all sorts. Why not make custom seats for themselves too? So you could have like your own designed furniture.
Solar Car Club at MIT led to Solar Car Company or electric car company.
Electria.
Yeah, the Model Rocket Club, the leadership of that Carl Dietrich and Anna Merzick. They became the founders of Terrafugia, a flying car company.
Wow.
I mean, there's lots of examples where clubs lead to stuff, but also, living groups.
Yeah, I ran Burton Connor for a year. They had a $30,000 budget, which was the most money I'd ever seen. It was amazing.
Well,
And
that's
they
an important, right. They trust, and by the way, overwhelmingly, I mean, I think now that I reflect back, in the arc of the 100K, there was one scandal a year out of 20, 25, 30 years where one of the students abused their privileges with the payment card, for example. But that one year leads to all subsequent years having more constraints.
That's sad.
And we benefited. I mean, this is an important part of the mix. When I was running the competition, there was no entrepreneurship center at Sloan. There was no office. There was no media lab location. I had the great fortune of having Mary Haas, the Dean of Engineering's executive assistant, be friendly to me. And she gave me a closet in the Dean of Engineering's office to run
Wow.
things out of. Right? We didn't have stuff on the web yet. I put things on the web, but I was physically holding on to paper and had crap. And I was in the closet in the Dean of Engineers. But the number on the door in the hallway was the Dean of Engineering's number. It wasn't the closet number. And that mattered. So having her really mattered. And the fiscal officer for the Dean of Engineering, Sheila Canode. When I showed up as the newly appointed, head of this competition, she said, "What are you going to do about the $10,000 worth of red ink in your account?" She could have stopped us right there and just said, "Listen, this is unacceptable." But no, she said, "Listen, I trust you to dig yourself out of this, and I'm going to help you do it." So having these two, right,
Supportive people,
really, really important, because it was trust with a kind of accountability, and they were willing to take that role on. Now, since then, I mean, it's been much more painful, because when those two retired, that relationship-based trust also disappeared. And the account went from Dean of Engineering to, what's it doing here? The engineering dean didn't care. It was illogical. Let's give it over to another unit. And that other unit had this thing foisted on them. We're like, why are we doing this? This is a student club, blah, blah, blah. Let's hand it over to student life. And student life, like, they're dealing with clubs with $500 milk and cookie budgets.
right?
And now you have this entrepreneurship competition with a $250,000 annual budget. And they're like, what the hell are we doing with this? Like, we don't know how to deal with this. Yeah, that led to lots of pain on the part of the students, because the university shoehorn them into places where, so I'm just saying that, having good judgment on the part of administrators is another important matter.
That's true. And you were able to wade through them and charm them.
Well, I mean, I don't think there was a lot of charm going on. I think it was the good fortune of just not knowing any better and being honest, and being super motivated to make sure things worked. But I understand the failure mode as well, right? There are, at least every decade on average, there's been at least one big scandal where students stole the money or tried to get away with stuff. Now, is that frequent? No, it's like once in 10 years. But every time that happens, that's what ratchets down. That you need more accountability, more oversight.
Right.
And that makes things a lot more painful.
Wow.
Because it does cost money to do stuff, and to, if you have to go through endless forums to get an event to happen, like, at a certain point, let's just do it on our own without all this overhead.
Right.
Suddenly, the benefits of doing something with a friendly academic home are lost. and you have to do stuff on your own. Like that, that's unfortunate.
It is.
Um,
But I think also now that it's been established, like the entrepreneurship ecosystem, I think that in some respects, you can also step away a bit and say, okay, other people, now you know what it should look like, deal with it.
And so, but the important thing is to realize how quickly things have piled on, so that there's now, now in Kendall Square, there's an entire building with multiple floors dedicated to student entrepreneurial space. And that's just one. There's still separate entrepreneurship center, a separate Deshpande center. There's programs within various labs at MIT, within schools, engineering school, architecture and planning school. There's programs like, there's now venture postdocs for the doctoral students who didn't realize they were wanted to be entrepreneurial. So today there's this almost surplus of goodness. There's so many things going on, you can barely pay attention to them all. And there's duplication of effort, because of course people are rivals in trying to get things. There are multiple entrepreneurs clubs.
Oh, wow.
Whereas none of that, I told you there were 3 things when I got started, and I helped add a 4th and run that, and then added a 5th, which is the Founders Project, to quantify all of it. And I was building up upon the effort of a predecessor, John Larson, who'd done this in Silicon Valley and in Route 1 and 28 areas. And I did it for the country and for the world.
Amazing.
And from that, we had survey responses. And one of the survey responses said, I'm an MIT alum entrepreneur, but I have more relationship with HBS professors than MIT, because they keep writing cases on me. And that's the genius of HBS. You write a case and the faculty get to know the entrepreneur. That's the whole point of writing a case. Teaching a case is far less powerful than writing the case. But MIT doesn't write cases, right? MIT is an academic research business school. So they don't do cases.
Wow.
So we needed something else. And I said the easiest thing is to skip writing a case and just have these alum entrepreneurs meet with the current students or the recent alums. And that then begat a whole pile of interesting companies, right? Mitch Capor's first investment as a new venture capitalist. Bob Metcalf's first investment as a new venture capitalist. Yeah.
Wow.
And there are books written, right? The Venture Cafe book by Teresa Esser. She writes about the role of you should read that, because it's the role of the venture cafe as a metaphor for the bar, the cafe, the informal schmooze gathering.
Yes,
the
I saw that.
salon.
They mentioned the Muddy Charles in there.
Right, that's right. But it's, like I said, it's a muddy from a previous era. It's no longer that way. And what else? The Jean-Jacques de Grove just wrote a book, which I haven't fully reviewed yet, but he attempts to survey things. Ed Roberts wrote this book. Doesn't quite get all the facts right, but he he remember things a little differently than how they actually happened. That's all right.
Well, I think it's important to tell your story too, because you've been shepherding it through these, I would say, 2 decades.
The master's thesis was an attempt to write down all this stuff.
Yeah, it does a great job, but it's also evolved a lot since then.
Yeah, since then, that's right.
Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Sure.
You're looking great, very healthy, and hopefully in the new year, I'll get to touch base with you again, write this up. Thank you.
Sounds good. Well, all the best also I'm very keen on hearing how things at Roger Williams sort of dial up. And my sort of biggest suggestions to you is who are the most entrepreneurial students, and can you help them with a little bit of nudging into a club? And who are the most active alumni entrepreneurs, and can you sort of begin documenting their activity. And then the obvious thing is connect those two.
Mhm.
And that has nothing to do with the business school or the engineering school per se, but the grads are most likely from the arts and technical disciplines. But who in fact, you'll find that out.
Right.
So you don't have to do the research, but encouraging the part of the university that cares about stuff to do the research. At MIT,
Yeah.
was it the Entrepreneurship Center? Was it Enterprise Forum? Partly. Who really was it? Fundraising. MIT's endowment and all the big names that are able to donate the money got the money through starting and building and growing their companies. Overwhelmingly, there's not a lot of inherited wealth in an MIT landscape. So they're usually overwhelmingly self-made, with a few big exceptions. So quantifying more of those alumni entrepreneurs, especially knowing about them early, was what would move the needle for fundraising.
Right.
So it was the fundraising research people that paid my bills. I talked myself into a job doing the Founders Project, working for the fundraising part of MIT.
Amazing.
And we didn't make that secret, right? I mean, this wasn't a bait and switch for the alums, but we did do it in partnership with the MIT Enterprise Forum, because at the time it was the most obvious. And I think subsequent to me, Ed Roberts and maybe Fiona Murray did this again, where the MIT Entrepreneurship Center, now the Trust Center, or the MIT Innovation Initiative, which is this sort of umbrella for everything, did those alumni surveys, because I wanted to know, who's new. Every year, there's 24 MIT spinoffs through the licensing office, but there's maybe like 200 startups founded by alumni, right? So that's where the action is, far more per year, and it's certainly not graduating students, right? But the number that start a company just finishing school is tiny compared to the number started by alums. There's so many more. 2,000 grads every year, 120,000 alums. So there you go.
Wow. And it's an
All right.
untapped resource.
Good
Thank
stuff.
you.
See you, and all the best, and just let me know if there's any follow-up.
Yeah, my best to you. And I would definitely email you with the resources. Thank you so much. Bye, Joost. Great seeing you.
Good to see you.